All right, and we are back again, like salt and pepper. Did they say that? I feel like they said that. Somebody else, I'm sure, said it too. Anyways, we're back, and ooh, a cameo.
In the video, by the way.
Oh, why not?
Because no.
Yeah, let's put you in the video.
Here, this is your outro.
It's like the Sistine Chapel.
Hold on, I'm gonna go make a.
Okay, so I got a lot of nonsense to talk about. In no particular order, we're just gonna knock through a bunch of Elon Twitter articles and talk about this nonsense because one of my favorite things that's happening right now in the world is this fucking man-child burning through $40 billion out of nothing but sheer petulance. So it's really fun. So this says he's sold $40 billion worth of Tesla stock, right? And what the article says is that he raised 32 billion, I want to say 32 billion, give or take, to, you know, get the company going. And that's capital that's been injected right into Tesla. That is actual money that has been in the coffers and been used to grow the business. On top of that, they have earned $9 billion in profits. So that's $41 billion of actualized cash flow. He has sold $40 billion worth of stock to finance this little pet project of his. And there's nothing that peeves me off more than people telling rich people what to do with their money. Like, oh, you should have given that 40 billion to charity. And burned through 40 for his pet project. And it's, you know, it's a dumpster fire of an experiment. And I just love that he's getting poorer by the day. Only because he thought he had some moral authority or moral, you know, duty to be the owner of the public square, and he's a free speech absolutist, all of which is bullshit, by the way. So here we are. I was saying one of my biggest pet peeves is people telling rich people what they should do with their money. It's like, you know what? It's not your money. Go make your own $100 and something billion and do whatever the fuck you want with it. In this case, let the man burn through his billions doing nonsensical, childish things. Who gives a shit, you know? And let's have fun while we watch him crash and burn. This is all pretty stupid coming from, you know, the smartest man alive. So he's got... he censored journalists, as you may have seen. Here's the headline: Twitter suspends journalists who have been covering Elon Musk and the company. And, you know, he claimed that it's because they were doxing me. And which doesn't hold water because they weren't actually doxing him. They were just covering Elon Jet, and I guess, you know, that was enough for him to cry foul about. And then he had handpicked a journalist to kind of write some hit pieces for him when he was trying to buy Twitter. And that journalist said, hey, this is unfair. This is not a good practice. And now, of course, he turned on her too. He's such a fucking thin-skinned little baby man who claims to be a free speech absolutist, but doesn't have any tolerance for a dissenting opinion or an actual light being shined on the nonsense he's doing. And, you know, he suspended Twitter Spaces after he was on there trying to defend his bullshit, and he got called out for it by journalists that were on the call. And then, you know, including, by the way, people that he had already banned were able to get on Twitter Spaces. And then he shut down Twitter Spaces and to fix a bug, and the bug being that people who had already been canceled could jump into Twitter Spaces. So he's now looking for investors to buy shares of Twitter at the same price he paid, which is ridiculous because the advertisers just fled. My understanding, I've read both, that users went up and users have come down, so somewhere in the middle is the truth. But for sure, advertisers have fled, so how can he expect to get the inflated price that he paid for it out of it? It's just such bullshit. And now, of course, Tesla investors are feeling like they're not getting the attention they deserve, so they're looking for, or there's been calls for his ouster as the CEO of Tesla. And, you know, somebody said that they need the Tesla's third largest shareholder demands Elon exit CEO role, says electric car maker needs Tim Cook-like leader, which, you know, one of the first things he did as CEO was piss off Apple, and Apple pissed him off, and they had a little tit for tat. That's moved over, but I don't think it's an accident that this person used Tim Cook as the example. They're banning the ability for links from other social media platforms. It's just non-stop owning, I guess. I can't think of a better word, but he keeps self-owning unforced errors. And he tweeted this out: I hope that even my worst critics remain on Twitter, because that's what free speech means. And then immediately turns around and starts banning people, but journalists who are criticizing him. And, you know, he's just full of shit. So speaking of bans, the TikTok ban that went into effect in Utah, and I guess there's other states too that have banned TikTok, I'm all in favor of, because it's spyware, you know. And unfortunately, yeah, my kid is on there and I hate it, but, you know, he's also a kid, so what the fuck are they going to steal, right? But from adults, people in, you know, public service, whatever, like, it's just, I don't understand why the federal government hasn't done anything about shutting down this thing that we know is spyware. Huawei, there's no Huawei servers in the federal government, right? So why are they letting these devices that are in our pockets every day track everything that we type, everything that we look at, everything that we search? I'm sure you give it permission to access your picture folders and any number of other stuff that is collecting your location, your keystrokes, everything. So I'm ready for it to disappear. So, you know, obviously Elon's a very polarizing figure, and there's, you know, acolytes, and sycophants, and just, you know, fanboys who just guzzle up everything that he does, and that's fine. And then there's, you know, people that criticize him, but you know, here's the thing about, I think, right, this polarization of everything, and that is that we can't see when the other side is doing the exact same thing, right? So here's this meme. And, it's funny because it's, somebody picking on the right. But at the end of the day, the left is exactly like this too. And, people are triggered by Elon. Not triggered. It's just to find a different word for these things. But, he's said to vote Republican before the midterm. People were up in arms about it. But if he had said vote Democrat, the other side would have been up in arms about it. And it's like, can we just... I keep saying this. I keep repeating myself. Can we just let people do and say whatever the fuck they want? And just bow out, tune out, disagree without wanting to silence them, right? He can have his opinion. Like, the Walton family is very clearly on one side of the political divide. The Koch family is very much on one side of the political divide. The Gates are on the other. And the all of Hollywood is on the other, right? And who gives a fuck? Let people think and say whatever they want. And if you disagree with them, if you have the access to them, you can have that conversation, you can have that debate. And if you don't, you can just opt out of whatever sphere of influence they may have, right? For the 1,000th time, I'm not on Twitter. I wasn't on Twitter before, and I sure as fuck I'm not going to be on Twitter now. I come across these fucking Elon memes, and I think it's hilarious that he's burning through his legacy for this petulance. That's where I'm coming at it from. But I otherwise don't give a shit about Elon. I don't give a shit about what he thinks, what he does, what he says. I'm not going to vote Republican because he said so, and I'm not going to vote Democrat because he said to vote Republican. Like, I'm going to come up with my own thoughts and my own fucking ways of expressing myself. And that's okay. And I can disagree with him, and I can disagree with anybody, and not have that be cause for upheaval, And we're also just so desperate to be outraged by anything that we can't just agree to disagree. And yes, I understand that there's a very important moral, I think, right? And this is where we can disagree again. My position is that I'm not going to vote for Republicans because what they stand for is hypocrisy, right? They don't stand for small government. They don't stand for people's rights, individual liberties. That's bullshit. They don't stand for fiscal conservatism. That's bullshit. They don't stand for anything. They stand for hypocrisy. And that's why I would never, right now, I would never vote for any Republican. Right? But if I was given a choice between a Trump Republican and a George W. Bush Republican, I would take a George W. Bush Republican all day long, right? Because this asshole is going to try to undermine the same structures that this asshole is going to, but he's going to do it with at least some decorum and know when to draw the line. This asshole is never going to draw the line. He draws the line at what is inconvenient or not good for me. That's it. He only cares about one person, right? This asshole might still care about institutions and traditions, even if those traditions and those institutions are fucked up. So I have a lot of Republican friends, right? And we can disagree all day long on all of the policy. But at the end of the day, the reason I would never vote for a Republican is because they're voting for things that will actually affect, in a negative way, the lives of people that I know and love. Right? They are actively trying to undo the things that people that I know and love have worked so hard to build, right? And you can go ahead and guesstimate what those things are, and you're probably right about all of them. It is about character. It's about a moral compass, right? It's not about policy. There are some Republican policies I agree with, but none of those policies outweigh the moral position that they have chosen to take. And there's lots of policies that Democrats are in favor of that I disagree with. But it's the same thing. That moral position is more important to me than paying more taxes. It is more important to me than having more immigrants in this country. It is more important to me than any other, whatever you want to choose, policy on the left. Human dignity is more important to me than political ideology. So that's the crux, right? Is we can disagree. We don't have the right to tell each other what to actually fucking do, believe, live, think. We can just disagree, and if we opt out, that's okay too. Which is, if you have a minute to go find this, there was a commercial for an app about you can only match people from the other side of the aisle, and it's like, a hate fucking app. It's pretty funny little skit, but Michael Costa with a K, if you want to look him up on Instagram. In talking about polarization and left and right ideology and a moral position, right? I remember, I'm going to tell you a little anecdote. So I remember being at dinner a long time ago with a group of friends, and I don't know, in the context of the conversation, I said Latino or Latina. I was talking about groups of people in Latin America, right? I said Latinos or Latinas. And this person said to me, the person that was sitting next to me, who was a dear friend, right, said to me, or Latinx. And I stopped for a minute. And I said to them, do you think anybody in Latin America actually gives a shit about this? And now I understand that I'm overgeneralizing, right? But genuinely, and this was my question to them, when a Venezuelan is digging dinner out of the back of a fucking garbage truck, or having to somehow find 30 USD to buy a gallon of milk, or when a Central American is trying to flee their country to escape drug violence and gang violence, or when a Mexican is trying to cross the border to get away from the cartels, or when an Argentinian is trying to move out of their country to find a better economic situation, or when a Bolivian disagrees with the political structure in their country and they're trying to get away from it, or when a Colombian wants to get away from crime and drugs and abject poverty. Do you think any of them give a shit about whether the language as a whole is gendered? Do you think they give a shit about whether I'm a Latino or she's a Latina? Or do you think they're just trying to get by and survive one more day, or get out of their country, or find the next meal, or take care of their children, or just get this much further ahead in life? Do you think they give a fuck about misgendered language? Or do you think they give a fuck about trying to survive? And my point isn't to say that we shouldn't care about people that don't identify as Latina or Latinos. My point is to say that you cannot, under any circumstances, tell me that these two things are the same scale of gravity. I talked about this the other day, scale of gravity. You can't tell me that the problems of survival, of getting through today, of having a meal, of not getting murdered or caught in the crossfire or trafficked or becoming a mule because there's no other option, is the same as the inconvenience of language. This is a very privileged concern to have. And there are people out there who are capable of having this concern. That is their privilege. By the way, this was a white, college-educated American that was trying to make this point to me about, well, can't we have both? Without the scale of gravity coming into play. So, you can't sit there in good consciousness, and I think you are good people, but you can't sit there and tell me that this thing here is the same as this thing here. That this language that has been around for hundreds of years, and its exclusions, and language can evolve and language can change. So whatever thing is missing from this language that can be added, but it shouldn't be added at the expense of subtracting something else. It can just be another thing, right? You can't tell me that this is the same as all of those other things I mentioned. And you sure as fuck can't impose those things on me. I am not Latinx. I am a Latino, and I would much rather you call me a Latina before you call me a Latinx, because I don't identify with that word in any way. Not to say you can't, but I don't. And that's okay, right? That should be okay, right? That should be fine. If you're telling me that I don't have the right to remove myself from the Latinx conversation, not conversation, but inclusion, against my will, then we have a problem. You're no different than Elon Musk telling people they should vote Republican. You're telling me that I should identify and embrace something that is not a part of my upbringing, that's not a part of my culture. Something I'm not denying you the opportunity to engage in, but you sure as fuck can't tell me what I can and can't engage in. So, there's this content creator who points these things out. He does it in a little bit more abrasive tone than I just did, but I think it's an important conversation to have, and I think it's an important reminder to give people that in your attempts at being inclusionary, sometimes, oftentimes, many times, you end up being exclusionary. You end up being that thing that you were trying to avoid. Because now, you've taken somebody like me out of the equation, because I want no part of it. So, you can be that. I will respect that. I will call you that. I will embrace your identity. You don't get to impose your identity and your identity politics on me.